Well, hello there, folks, and welcome to the Unofficial Unreal Engine podcast, where we talk about all things Unreal Engine and also biting your thumb when the law is on your side. We're your hosts. My name's Alex.
And I'm Jacob. Well, that was a good one. I really appreciated that.
I'm reading Romeo and Juliet to the kids right now. I'm surprised how enraptured they are with the thing. They're 5 and 7 years old.
Well, make sure if you liked Alex's intro that you like, subscribe, comment, rate, whatever it is, wherever you're listening, watching, etc. Wow, did your camera just freeze?
Yeah,
we get a freeze frame there this early in the podcast.
Pretty good.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I know, right? It's because I lose my signal if the battery's too low. It's okay.
I want everyone to know we've been on this call 20 minutes and we jump on and all of a sudden it gets way more interesting. So you guys are here for the good part. Let's say that.
Yeah, I think we have to comment for anyone watching too, just our costumes. Usually we're in like our standard Unreal Engine garb, and without coordinating at all, I decided to go like Hugh Hefner silk pajamas and Jacob's in.
I showed up with a Guinness and
yeah, just a Guinness and a trucker's hat and like, different styles.
Well, we're making it work. But what are we talking about today, Alex?
Ooh, we got some fun things to chat about. We've got some fun announcements about Unreal Engine 5.3, which seems to be imminent. I don't know what's going on, but usually if you download the source build of Unreal Engine from the GitHub and you go from the main branch, if it starts opening in 5.4, as it is doing now, that tells you that somewhere in the near future, 5.3 will be coming out soon, which seems kind of crazy because how long ago did 5.2 come out, Jacob?
Not that long ago. 5.2 was released at what conference? Around GDC, right?
Around GDC, yeah.
So that was March. Yeah. So it's been only 3-4 months. That's pretty crazy for a release of this size. And we're going to get into all the details here. I think there's so many interesting topics. I mean, those of you who have listened to the podcast before will know that we love just scrolling through these releases nonstop and just picking them apart. But let us know if you enjoy this process, or if you prefer we actually really dig into the code, whatever it is you're interested in. I love this though.
Yeah, I certainly would love if we had the time and resources to do something kind of like what Steve Murphy has done in some talks like at Unreal Fest last year, where it's like, here's like a good like 30-second, video or tutorial inside Unreal of like each of these features, like quick tips. And here's what's so cool about this. But because we are lazier at the moment, we are going to go through the public roadmap, and hopefully it is still interesting just to hear us riff on some of these upcoming features.
Sure.
Jacob, do you want to share your screen for our listeners who are viewing, and then you can kind of drive, and we'll just do a bit of a peanut gallery commentary on what we see.
All right. Well, I mean, okay. Let's refresh people's memory real quick. So 5.2, there's a lot in here, right?
Yeah.
This was a big release. I mean, this is just the roadmap, right? So this is just the main key areas. Like if we went back and poked at that 5.2 release notes, I think some of you will remember that was a page that you could scroll for like 5 minutes down and not stop, right? So I just want to point out, we're not creating too many spoilers here. There's going to be a lot coming down the road that doesn't fit into this specific roadmap. But what we do know looking at this is the kind of key areas, the big release items, that kind of stuff. That this was a special release though, where I think you have to correct me if I'm wrong. Actually, no, PCG was announced at GDC along with the other things, because I'm not even seeing things on here like ML Deformer, which I guess really didn't come until much later, right? So let's jump in. Let's just jump in here.
Cool.
So, I mean, right off the bat, obviously we got Lumen and Nanite updates. We've had these in pretty much every release, but there's some pretty cool stuff here. So like Lumen, we get multi bounce reflections and continuous improvements. I know you've been playing around a lot with Lumen, but a lot in VR, right?
Yeah, that's right. And definitely the holy grail for VR would be for Lumen to be able to do solid mirror reflections. And with the screenshot we're looking at right now, like those are looking pretty good. Like that, those are pretty clean, like chrome metal. And I already saw in the Hillside sample, which released about a month ago, that the reflections were getting much better. And, you know, ever since 5.0 came out, they've been saying ray tracing is deprecated. And it's like, okay, if it's deprecated, then we need to actually have something that's replacing it. But in the world of VR, I've still been doing a lot of projects in, you know, 4.27 with ray tracing for reflections, because that has still been the best bang for our buck in terms of quality mixed with performance. And I feel like with this 5.3 release, and we'll see more of these features mentioned later here, that there is finally starting to be a level of quality and performance, importantly, with Lumen and Nanite that will allow for things to work well in VR, where of course everything is up for more scrutiny. You can have something that's going to run great at 720p, and if that's the size everyone's seen it on, then like there's a lot of things you can hide. But as soon as you're going to let someone be in VR in, you know, 8K screens, and you're letting them lean down and like expect something closely, you want to make sure that quality can hold up.
For sure. Yeah. And honestly, these are the kinds of things that, like, you know, multi-bounce reflections, I think really make the most sense for the kinds of use case. I mean, the kinds of use cases they're showing here, but I'd imagine a lot of stuff you're working on where it's like you have a lot of highly metallic surfaces, and you're dealing with things like window, right? Like I haven't played too many games that have really, I felt, needed something like this, just because it, you know, the kind of entire genre is built around settings that don't use like Chrome and stuff like that. But I am really excited to see like, oh well, if this gets really good and people stop kind of worrying about some of these concerns, like, do we get new interesting environments, do we get new types of games? I don't know, I think it could be exciting. And certainly in VR, I have to imagine, like every time you get this kind of update, it unlocks a little bit of what you're imagining, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a bathroom and it's a bathroom with a lot of metal and mirrors that might see each other, like that's immediately a nightmare. And if Lumen can start to make that actually look pretty good, as you know, it seems to imply in the screenshot here with multiple bounces and all that, then I think we're going to be in really good shape.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, to go along with that, Path Tracer is something we brought up a lot. There's a bunch of updates here. The big one, and we're gonna, I guess, hit this a little later in the document, again with Substrate. I know we mentioned this last time too, but I think Substrate's a pretty interesting addition to the engine. It really adds a lot of tech for folks in the VFX world, static rendering, who need kind of final frame kind of quality out of this. There's a lot here that kind of shows that this is starting to really get towards production. So we're seeing you know, like volumes, and typically speaking, when you see support in any sort of path tracer or renderer for things like volumes or simulation or some of the stuff they're talking about here, that usually means they're kind of nearing production, because these are what you call like kind of nice to haves when it in a lot of production, because a lot of folks who are doing this level of production or this level of rendering are probably actually using other tools for a lot of their volumetric. So that would be things like Houdini, you know, simulations, and typically those things are things either you'll render out separately, or maybe you were bringing them into Unreal to you know, visualize, but you weren't necessarily rendering out these kinds of volumes. You know, this is clearly pointing out that they're getting to a point where like, oh well, maybe you'll actually be able to do all this inside the engine. I think that's pretty cool. Where it's getting, I do, as you know, avid listeners or viewers will know, still dislike the path tracer and what it stands for, but overall I think this is actually a really cool.
What it stands for, it stands
what
for
it stands
fascism.
for. Yeah, it's anti-real time, you know. It's weird. It's weird in my book.
Yeah, I was reading a manifesto actually the other day called Real Time or Death, which I think is very much part and parcel with your philosophy, Jacob.
I don't like it.
On the path tracing note, real quick too, I'll mention that our pal Jay from JS Films is currently demoing a 4 GPU setup from a company called Render Boxes, and there's all sorts of cool stuff you can do with that, with like RTX 6000s, the Ada Lovelace ones, connected to something like NVIDIA Omniverse. In Unreal, there's not a lot you can do with it real time because of the fact that Unreal is still pretty biased toward favoring like one super fast core over like lots of distributed CPU cores, unless you really dig into the C++ code of it all. But he has done these really interesting comparisons, taking all those GPUs and all that horsepower to say, like, let's crank out super high quality path traced renders of metahumans and environments and all that. And what I found, which is really fascinating, is he'll be like, here's this 15-second animation, and it took 20 hours to render with path tracing, even with all this horsepower, and let's compare that to like the real-time version, or the just like lumen settings cranked up high, but still something around like 5 seconds per render, and it's not that different. Like I think that's
that's my point as well, is like I get why they're implementing the path tracer. It checks the right boxes for the sorts of industries who are viewing Unreal as a transformational tool. And I get that. I think it's important for them to execute on it, but I think fundamentally it still goes against like the revolution that this started, which is all about, no, we're not going to do things that way. We are going to really dig in on real time, and there's all sorts of different ways to view real time. Game engines, really, to in the context of like where they sit between other technologies. Like I saw a really interesting post from Tim Sweeney a while back that was like, well, actually, you can think of real-time game engines as like 60, like frames a second, like databases, which just have to query massive amounts of data and process them at this constant fast rate. And it's really, I mean, there is so much going on behind the scenes in these engines that have been developed specifically for that real-time component. And to take that and then say, no, we want it slower, we want it not real time, is like, to me, kind of defeating the purpose. I don't know. I'm probably belaboring the point, but I think it is important to say.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we skipped over a few things here too, like orthographic rendering. We were chatting a little bit about this before.
Yeah, that's something that has been in Unreal forever, actually, but a lot of people lost track of it because it stayed relegated to the matinee camera. It never came over to the cine camera. So, if you wanted to have like a proper, let's say like a key plan, if you're doing an architectural project, you would want to use the orthographic option from that older camera and then somehow combine that with a scene capture 2D component or something like that, and have that render, but separately. I think it actually ends up on a separate rendering pass from everything else, especially if you're using the cine camera.
For those of us who are not familiar, what is the difference between orthographic and
great question.
Camera?
Yeah, so orthographic basically means like true measurement. It's Greek for true measurement. No, I'm trying to think about what ortho stands for. Graphic does mean something like measurement, but basically the idea is that you could take a ruler and you could put that ruler anywhere on that image or that drawing, and you are seeing, a not necessarily a one-to-one reference of measurements, but something consistent. It's like always 1 to 50 or something like that. 1 inch equals 50 feet or whatever the case may be, because of course with perspective you have things that recede into the background. With orthographic, there's no things getting smaller the further they are in the distance. A foot is a foot is a foot, no matter where it is on the image.
Yeah, and for the record, you are spot on in that orthographic does mean true or correct. So true, true picture or something like, I don't know. I guess
that's funny. I have no idea that ortho means true.
Yeah, it's like true or correct. I mean, graphic or pertaining to drawing. So yeah, true drawing. You were spot on there.
All right.
From a rendering perspective, it's exactly the same thing, of course, but it's like, from a camera, we talk about frustrums all the time, where it's like, okay, you have a single point where like your virtual eyes are, and you're drawing a line from that point in kind of a, a cone outwards, which represents your line of sight, right? Like humans have your peripherals, you have a specific angular distance that you can view, right? My understanding, at least, is that orthographic is actually, you take a flat plane, which is the size of your image, right? And you transmit a ray going perpendicular to that plane out into the scene, and that's how you gather an orthographic view, right? So it probably seems more trivial than it is to implement inside of a game engine. And I am actually intrigued as to how much work went into this feature and why it's just coming now, because I have to imagine this has probably been a request for a while. But yeah, I bet it's probably not, it's super not trivial to implement, like Lumen and Nanite, all these things that require like depth and culling and all these other things. I have to imagine it's probably pretty tricky.
Yeah, you're definitely giving me flashbacks, by the way, to my first year in architecture school, where we were not allowed to touch a computer, and to achieve, good axonometric drawings, which is another form of like an orthographic drawing. There were all these like little tricks we had with our Mayline and our Mylar to like, make everything like project in the right way to give true measurements. And yeah, it was fun, but I'm also glad I don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah. I remember when I first picked up like a graphics, like engineering book. The first I'm gonna totally botch this, but the first example they give is like, okay, you have a piece of paper and above it you have a single point and you tie some string to both sides, and your goal is to like try to draw things from one side of the camera to the other. Well, that transformation is like the perspective or whatever, and it goes crazy. And you're sitting there thinking like, oh, I just want to make pretty pictures, right? Like, I don't know if I need to know all this, but of course it is important to understand. And I don't know. Now you know that true or orthographic means true drawing for sure. So you definitely aced it the first time. So all right. What else? Then I just want to say, I like, this is a fine release, but this photo, I love this photo for some reason. I have no clue why. Like, this bevel is so satisfying to me. I don't know why, but I guess I am used to seeing this kind of stuff. I'm pointing to a photo on the left that has like the classic, when you bring in any sort of curved or beveled surface, you get like ambient occlusion almost on the corners where it like turns over, or like the UVs. I don't know.
It's tangents, yeah.
Yeah, tangents. Sorry. Yeah, it literally says it in front of me. I'm just being stupid. The tangents at that corner get all messed up, but this looks awesome. And there's a few other things like spline meshes, which I think is pretty cool. It's really like, they could have stopped at Nanite just being able to do like static geometry and everyone would have been happy, but no, they're like, oh no, it has to work for, this is down here, like it has to work for landscapes, it has to work for characters, it has to work for foliage. Like, I think it's just awesome.
How far out do you think we are from skeletal meshes working with Nanite?
That's a really good question. I don't know. It seems like the challenges are pretty complex there, in terms of like, my limited understanding of Nanite is that it requires the screen space like component, in the sense that like you need to be able to predict what portions of the mesh are visible in one time, because you're resampling the mesh to like try to match up one triangle per pixel or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know how that would work inside of an animation system where you're having to use either a physics engine or like you're doing transforms on like the mesh that are driven by the skeleton and not driven by other game logic or any other like or like engine component. I don't know how that would work. It seems incredibly complex, but I'm sure we'll get there. I would bet we're probably only 1 or 2 releases away at this rate, like it's hard to say, but yeah, it's so cool to see.
Yeah, I think you're identifying the challenges right, because I think about how so much of like Lumen and Nanite is based on things being static and like what's it called, mesh distance fields, and this kind of wax sculpture you get of each object that is supposed to allow Unreal Engine to have a good approximation of like where something is going to be and how shadows will play off of it. And as soon as you start saying like, oh, but it's a wavy skeleton or it has like cloth simulation, that seems to make things way more complicated.
Yeah, and like I remember I was playing around with like the procedural mesh generation stuff with Nanite, and like it was definitely possible to do it in real time, but boy did it chunk. Like you would make a change and it would still have to process all the geometry and like create the different level caches that it uses to interpolate between. My understanding is also that Nanite uses like different levels, like it stores almost like similar to an LOD system, like it stores different layers of detail on disk and is able to stream those in and just in time, so to speak. But like that information has to be stored somewhere and it has to be processed and it has to be like, so I'd imagine like if we see, for example, like skeletal meshes, it's going to be like the sort of thing where it's going to be limited to a specific number of joints, or we're going to see it just on a specific platform, or it's going to be in a demo on PS5 where it's like very well controlled, right? Like I think that seems possible, but yeah, it definitely seems complicated.
I mean, already, even with the city sample demo, like if you zoom out and the way that the hundreds and hundreds of metahumans that can be walking along the streets become like billboards and oh, what's the term? It's like where there is an animation, but it's like there's no more bones anymore. There's all sorts of tricks going on, like vertex animations.
Like
so like as you zoom out,
or
there's
no, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and there's billboards with like PNGs and everything, and like there's so many tricks there to allow there to be good performance with lots of skeletal meshes in the scene. And the answer right now is like, well, stop making them skeletal meshes at a certain distance, but it'll be great when that becomes easier and more straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the right people are on it, right? Like this is a complicated problem, and the fact that they have pushed it this far, and like I said, is just incredible. I mean, landscape seems to me like such an obvious, awesome use for Nanite, where it's like it's something where I remember where when I was playing with Unreal for the first time, like I went in there and started building a terrain and I kept subdividing it because I was like, oh, well, when I get close, I can't like add any detail. Like, how am I supposed to build something compelling or like a large world or something like that if like I can't increase geometry detail enough? And well, the real answer is like that's not really what you're supposed to do, right? Like you're supposed to kind of rough out your terrain, then you use like normal maps, or you add in additional geometry to smooth it out, or there's all these other techniques you would use. But like the fun thing is like going in there and grabbing a brush and just making huge big mountains and not worrying about like the geometry tearing, or like I can imagine a future in UE with Nanite landscapes where it's like the tools that you're using to edit it, just like in something like ZBrush, right? Like you're able to increase the resolution as you're painting that detail onto the landscape, so that you like a new user doesn't have to worry about those concerns and really can just kind of create what they're envisioning. So I think this is pretty cool.
Yeah. By the way, I can't recall if we talked in a previous podcast about the updates to Cesium, which now gives you like all of Google Maps and all that. And that's crazy, because speaking about like landscapes, and especially, I don't know if it uses Nanite or anything like that, but just the ability to be like, I'm out in space and now I'm zooming into this particular mountain range or whatever. And now it's just all there in Unreal, viewable in VR or in real time in some other capacity is pretty mind boggling.
Yeah. And we got to find that. I saw this on Twitter as well. That like Superman demo, right?
Yeah.
Where someone was like flying in. I'm gonna see if I can find that. Because that was super cool.
We can finally have No Man's Sky, but in Unreal Engine.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean that's such a cool demo, and I think like thinking about the sorts of applications that really like is incredible for is like if you're doing simulation work, like let's say there are a lot of people, for example, who use Unreal as synthetic data for training things like autonomous cars or
Yeah.
drones or whatever it is, right? Like being able to just drop in a simulate, like drop in a let's say meter accurate scan of Earth is unbelievable, right? Like the amount of things you can do with that, and the kind of accessibility that gives, right? I just think that's incredible.
Yeah. Cool. Let's go through some more features.
Yeah. I'm just putting a note down here so I can see if I can find that video a little later. All right.
Sure.
What else? There's the XR. We kind of covered a little bit of that, right?
Yeah, click on it and I'll mention a couple of the cool things
Yeah.
there. So XR, gaze track foveated variable rate shading. So this is just another optimization that will deal more with where your eyes are looking, whether there is actually eye tracking like a MetaQuest Pro or an Apple Vision Pro. Again, no idea if it'll be supported in Unreal Engine, but knowing where the eyes are looking, you can also just say like, let's just assume people are looking straight ahead and change what gets rendered at what level of foveation or resolution based on that. So that's a nice little boost. Single pass stereo rendering for nanite and stereo improvements for lumen global illumination. These two things are things people have been begging for and waiting for since the first announcements of Unreal Engine 5, because Unreal Engine's done a pretty good job over the life cycle of Unreal Engine 4 of getting to the point where if you are in forward rendering path and you are rendering in VR, you can use instant stereo and all these things that really drastically simplify the amount of work that needs to be done to render both eyes. You are not actually rendering two separate render passes. It doesn't take twice as long to render your left and your right eye as it does to just render your left eye, because of course there's a lot of things that are in common there. And until now, not a lot of that has carried over into the deferred rendering path in DirectX 12 with Lumen and Nanite. So even when I got so excited about the possibilities of Lumen and Nanite when 5.1 had the first experimental versions of that, it was not very easy to get good performance on that, because you essentially did need to double the rendering cost and rendering speed, just the rendering cost of how you were going to get all of that working. And so now, the short version of what this is saying is like, hey, a lot of those improvements that you've seen in the past with VR, we're starting to bring a lot of those to Lumen and Nanite. So we should see some pretty drastic reductions in 5.3 in the cost of rendering Lumen and Nanite in VR. Like right now, I'm probably, putting 15% of our VR projects into Lumen and Nanite. The rest are still in forward rendering. A lot of them are still in 4.27 because it's just more stable and more reliable. I think with 5.3, we'll finally be able to get up to, ideally, 60% of our projects could maybe start to move to 5.3 if the reflections that we're looking at earlier are starting to get good enough, and the speed that Lumen and Nanite can render are starting to get a little bit closer to what we've seen in the past with standard LODs and light baking and forward shading and all that.
Yeah.
And a couple more things here. Handheld AR improvements. That template has been like a little bit broken. I've taught courses on the handheld AR template, and it's been a little bit of a mess. It really didn't work in 5.1. It has some problems in 5.2. I'm glad to see in 5.3 that a lot of that is being fixed and working again. We have a course that kind of combines like all the different samples that come from the AR template with a skeletal mesh and a 3D model, and starting to trigger like different animations. And I'm excited for that to start to work well. Again, also looking toward a future where maybe this all works on Apple Vision Pro. All those things in the handheld AR template are going to be really foundational for getting a good Apple Vision Pro app out of Unreal Engine. XR Scribe is something that Victor Brodin actually teased back in February when him and I were on Inside Unreal. It was a very long, 2.5 hour live stream, so it's totally fine that people did not catch everything we brought up. But I was mentioning this product from NVIDIA. I did a little webinar on VCR, so virtual reality capture and replay, which basically allows you to take OpenXR data from anything, from Unreal, from Unity, from anything, and record that all, and then play it back. So then you don't need to always have your headset on. You can say like, I want to dig into, getting my snap turn to work correctly. So I'm going to record me doing the input and the head movement and all these things to test this. Then I'm going to take my headset off and I'm going to keep modifying my blueprint code. And I'm going to keep playing this back over and over again until it behaves the way I expect it to. The spectator cam also being a great tool for that, because you're playing back VR data and you can zoom out and see it from third person. So XR Scribe is something a lot like virtual reality caption replay. This is native to Unreal Engine, though, and is going to be built right into the engine to allow you to record and then emulate the playback of different kinds of XR data using any kind of OpenXR headset. So that's very exciting, especially because I think this will work with Oculus, whereas virtual reality caption replay from NVIDIA only works with Steam VR.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say on that, but yeah, I'm very excited to see more improvements here. I had no clue some of the issues you were talking about with, like how bad the situation was with rendering two totally different views. I think that's crazy. So I hope this continues to improve.
And I'm glad to see they also mentioned in other improvements that it's going to be easier to just package Meta projects. And I hope that carries over into the Meta XR plugin, which has been giving us such headaches. Like, we can package to Quest and all that totally fine if we literally just package directly to the headset from the VR template. As soon as we try to use the Meta XR plugin from Meta, every time that plugin has released, there's been some weird issues. Most recently, I've had the problem with version 54, where it will either open up as a 2D app inside a Quest headset instead of a VR one, or it will only render in one eye. So, anything that starts to make all that more reliable or consistent is great.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep going here. I think one of the big ones is the skeletal editor.
Yeah.
I think this is very cool. So for those who kind of don't know the suite of tools that goes into like animation, the kind of the process goes that you build some geometry or mesh. Usually today, a lot of that kind of work is done in something like ZBrush. Usually you'll have your kind of foundational character models will be built in a modeling tool like Maya. You'll take that, you'll bring it into something like ZBrush, you'll build additional layers of detail on top of that, or maybe you're just using MetaHuman these days. It depends. You'll bring something like that into ZBrush where you'll, add fine details, or maybe you'll create, clothes or whatever it is for that character. And then you'll take that and usually, you bake that down. So you have a lower geometry version that has the high detailed like normals and tangents. Maybe that will change with Nanite. We'll see. You'll take that, you'll bring it back into something like Maya. And once you're there, you'll start painting on the blend, the weights, or you'll start building your rig, I should say, first. So you'll start laying out your skeleton and where the different joints of the character are, and you'll set all that up, and you'll probably build a big rig around it, meaning the different tools you use to animate on top of that. And then you have to attach the skeleton to the actual geometry, and that process is with a tool like this. So painting weights means you essentially describe on your model and you paint it on how closely those specific vertices in the geometry should follow the underlying skeleton. And the reasons for that is, let's say you just had every vertex follow the movement of the skeleton, you'd get terrible issues with joints when they move and overlapping, skin and bones. It would not work very well. All right. So you got to paint these things on. But what we just went through was like, okay, well, you got to go from Maya, then you got to go to ZBrush, then you got to go back to Maya, and then you got to bring that into Unreal. And then you can start, working. Really, in reality, you got to start animating. Maybe you got to start simulating. So there's a few other jumps in there, right? With this, the idea is, okay, let's say you have your high resolution, character model out of something like ZBrush, or you're using some other pipeline to generate the geometry. You bring that into Unreal. You can now procedurally rig it with control rig or manually rig it, of course. It has full IK tools. You don't have to worry about setting all that up after the fact in Unreal. And now you can also paint the blend weight. So you don't even have to, you don't have to export this back out. You don't have to worry about anything. The skeleton gets set up. You can retarget it. Like if you already have a skeleton set up for similar characters, like it's all there, right? So I think this is super cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And the modeling tool set has been great. And just the ability to open up static meshes and adjust all sorts of things about them has really been wonderful. But anyone who's been like, oh, cool, let me also do that to my metahuman, gets sorely disappointed to see that they cannot access any of those tools with a skeletal mesh. So yeah, this is all much appreciated.
For sure. Yeah, I think I think this is an awesome tool. We've talked about this before, how much content they're putting in the editor. This is another example of that, right?
Yeah. Although, as I said that out loud, it did just occur to me, like, so yeah, this is all very specific to skeletal meshes, all the blend weights and everything. Will skeletal meshes actually be something you could modify the, geometry of? Could you actually add like noise or deform a skeletal mesh in any way?
Inside of something like this?
Yeah, because that seems like a different tool, actually.
Yeah, that's not really what this would be
Yeah.
for. It does say you can add and remove bones, and like there's some stuff in here. But like in terms of like geometry painting, like you would do in something like ZBrush, that's not really something you can do inside of Unreal yet. I say yet because I've been wrong before about saying, oh, that doesn't really make sense for Unreal, and then they just go out and build it anyways. Like they built the whole modeling tool set, and there's a lot in here, right?
Yeah.
But no, that's not something that exists now. It like ZBrush, I think, is an industry standard tool for a reason, and that is like it's a really good solution for the kind of work that people are doing today. And I don't feel like it's enough friction for Epic to come in and say like, oh well, we need to come develop our own tool.
Yeah.
So maybe it doesn't make sense. Maybe they develop something like that. I mean, it's not a huge jump to go from this to like being able to adjust the mesh, but like, like sculpting and stuff like that, I think is out of scope.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. There's a lot of other stuff here. We've already, I mean, there's so much cool stuff here, so we're just not gonna have enough time for everything.
Let's do a quick lightning round.
Yeah, a quick lightning round on the virtual production slides here. First one, SMPTE 2110. This is super nerdy, but what it does do is let you do end display over IP, with the ability to do synchronization also over that same, kind of networking, which is awesome because that means like you can actually do this either remotely. You don't have to have your all your systems kind of coordinated with like NVIDIA's proprietary cards or over the same, like in the same physical system, or using some, window, kind of like a Windows manager for creating mega displays or whatever it is. You cannot do that all over IP, and there's some added benefits that get thrown in here along with it. That's a pretty cool one. Virtual cameras, we've mentioned this before. This is really cool. You can do this with pixel streaming as well, where it's actually, this might be even different from what I was thinking it was. I just looked at this again, and it looks completely different from that what I was expecting. But I assume it's pretty similar to what we saw with virtual camera for like pixel streaming. Multiple output providers for a single VCam component. HUD and stream, you can stream and operators. Maybe this is pretty similar. I want to take a deeper look at this though, because it does look like maybe there's some added features here I wasn't expecting. But this is a lightning round, so we're gonna keep moving. And then the cine capture component, this is actually a really cool one. Alex, do you want to take the lightning round on this one?
Yeah, so we've had a scene capture component 2D for a long time, and that's basically how you get things like the spectator camera view in VR. It's how you would set up a key plane. It's how you would do something like a crossfade between two different camera views. The problem has been that that scene capture component 2D has, like what we were talking about earlier with, if you want to be orthographic, it uses kind of that old matinee version of the camera, which doesn't give you all the bells and whistles of the cine camera. You don't have focus and tracking and you know, all these things about your f-stops and aperture and things like that. And so now what this is starting to allow for is that same ability to kind of like capture what a cine camera is seeing and bring it to a render texture, which then can be used for all sorts of things, you know, broadcast onto a material or sending that data out via pixel streaming, all sorts of other things. So very exciting.
Yeah. It's just one of the things you thought you already had in the engine, and you know, it wasn't quite right. All right, what else we got? More Niagara fluid stuff. I mean, this stuff looks so cool.
Yeah.
But being able to import sparse volume textures, which means you can you know, import new types of simulations and read and write that data in real time, which is super cool. What else we got? There's man, there's so much stuff here.
I know.
USD, yeah, we got new
Love the
USD
USD stuff.
capabilities. You're now able to import geometry caches and animate directly in sequencer, and it's persistent. It saves directly to the USD file. You don't have to do any translation, which is pretty awesome. We got Material X support, which I think was already supported in a NVIDIA plugin for a while. But Material X is what is up and coming as a standard, along with USD for material definitions. You can now have multiple UV sets in a single USD file loaded into the engine, which is sweet. All right, what else we got? Data assets. We were talking a little bit about data assets before we started. There's a lot, I guess, there that I haven't even touched inside the engine. So
yeah. Oh, one we hopped over that I think we wanted to mention briefly is Common UI. And for the screenshot for that one, they're showing the UI that comes with the Lyra sample with the multiplayer EOS game. And I think the idea here is they want to allow a very straightforward way to have kind of like all your standard, like what's the resolution, what settings are on and off, and then having like the buttons and everything there be very modular and easy to bring from one project to another. They do mention using the enhanced input system, which again helps to migrate input very easily from one project to another. So I'm excited to check this out, because I can't tell you how many times I've recreated like a basic UI system from project to project to project, just because there was some weird little finicky thing that was making it hard to migrate.
Yeah, it seems like for a lot of stuff, like, you know, graphic settings, or, you know, that they're showing here, and you know, UI that's not necessarily directly involved in your game. This seems like an obvious like quality of life thing, where it's like you should not have to recreate the wheel to like manage rendering settings that are common to the engine, like that stuff. And that's what I'm seeing in the screenshot. I'm sure it extends beyond that, but like that stuff to me makes a lot of sense. Whereas like the stuff you would traditionally do in UMG with, like, you know, your magazine ammo counter, or in your FPS, or, you know, whatever it is, like that's probably pretty unique. But this seems like it should have, again, another one of those things where it's like, oh, I thought this was already in the engine, but you're like, you look at the UMG components and they're all pretty basic and not super designed or useful.
Yeah. And the number of times people say, like, can't I just have a button that will like automatically figure out how powerful my computer is and set Unreal Engine's quality settings based on that? Like, that is a thing you can do, but not a lot of developers take the time to do that. And the fact that even in the screenshot here, again, I think this is from Lyra, but there is a button for auto set quality. Click that button and it's going to kind of do its best to figure out what is going to work well for you. A lot like what you see in the editor, where you can kind of have it decide epic or cinematic or high or whatever it's going to use.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty curious how some of those mechanisms work, but like, I feel like you could have hacked this together with just like a tick measuring how long each frame is taking, and
Oh yeah.
a couple of quality settings, like blueprint nodes. But it's that kind of thing where it's like that boilerplate stuff is so annoying to have to do for every project, right?
Yep.
All right, what else we got? I think we covered most
Yeah, there's a
of
couple
the
more at the
stuff
bottom I want
here.
to touch on
Oh, for
briefly.
sure.
Blueprint type change auto casting. Now I want to test this, but I think this is actually like a nice little thing. Like people tell me all the time, oh, I should be using interfaces more than casting the way I'm using it. But for the fact that I am using casting a lot, this seems like a nice little quality of life improvement because it's basically removing a step. Like it kind of automatically seems to set up a cast instead of you having to take the time to figure out like what exactly you're casting to. It's hard to explain without actually being in blueprints, but if this is doing what I think it's doing, it's definitely the kind of thing that will save a lot of clicks, especially because casting is usually one of those places where I just make a dumb mistake and it breaks the whole blueprint, but not in an obvious way.
Yeah, and this seems like a great quality of life thing. I'm not even sure I fully understand the note here. But yeah, I would love to see this in action. I remember all the times I jumped into blueprints, and all of a sudden it's like that one little thing that makes your life so much easier. And this seems
Yeah,
like those things.
exactly. Then the other couple things I wanted to mention at the bottom are, I think the only other one was just the collaborative viewer template, which I am such an evangelist for. I made sure that there was a class about it at Unreal Fest last year. I was going to teach it, then I handed it off to Simon Blakeney, who's awesome. And this is a template that has been in Unreal Engine for a long time, but it has out of the box multiplayer and out of the blocks parity, where it will work in both VR and desktop mode. And there's like a fly mode and an orbit mode and all sorts of like markup features. And it's been lagging behind some of the other templates in terms of the enhanced input system, which, as I just mentioned, is great because it allows you to easily migrate all sorts of different input and modes into something without having to deal with like going into an any file and adjusting anything there. So it's nice to see the collaborative viewer getting a good update for 5.3.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, did we make it? Did we make it through?
I know we just wanted to mention that the anamorphic lens calibration stuff, that's something a lot of cinematographers are really excited about. I have not played a lot with anamorphic lenses, but it's been a feature request for a long time.
Man, yeah, okay. There's so much in here. Felt like somewhere else I saw, well, yeah, I think we get the idea. There's so much content here. I'm sure we'll have to dedicate a whole episode to when this actually releases, and there's 1,000 other things in this release. But yeah, this is awesome.
Super quick thing I'll also mention about I just saw hair is cool, by the way. Now hair is actually working properly in VR in stereo. It wasn't before, so that's cool. It doesn't seem to crash the engine as much. And one other thing about the enhanced input system, which I clearly could rattle on about for a long time, the Electric Dream sample by the way, I might have mentioned this in the last podcast, but it was so easy to sit there with my kids and they were like so blown away by this lush environment, and for them to say like, oh, can we drive in this environment? I was like, why, yes, you can. And there was this Rivian car, but it's not there anymore. So all we need to do is just add in the automotive template, and like all the input and all the pawns and everything comes with it, and now you can drive. If you want to see it in VR, we'll add the VR template. Do you want to see it in third person mode? We add the third person template. And before enhanced input, that was a non-trivial task. It was actually very difficult to set up all those different templates with all the input and everything casting correctly. Now it's very, very straightforward. It takes 10 seconds to set up those different game modes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
I still want my Rivian, man. Like, when are they gonna put that on the marketplace? Like, I'd pay a few bucks to
me too
drive the Rivian around the demo.
Yeah.
There's a ton of PCG stuff we didn't talk about. Continues to be clearly a huge area of focus. External data from PCG, you can use point clouds, which is really cool. I mean, I'm sure there's way more here, but we'll have to get to it in another episode.
Yeah.
All right. Believe it or not, though, we got other things to talk about too, don't we?
Just a few things. So I had a lightning trip to Austin I left on so I was supposed to leave on Thursday of last week at noon, and delay, ended up leaving at like 11:30 at night. I arrived at my hotel at about 4 a.m. And within 24 hours of that, I was on my way out of Austin. The reason for that was there was a very special VIP guest who will go unnamed at our big VR project that is in Austin. And he gave us a lot of excellent feedback for what we built, which I've mentioned briefly on the podcast before, is this giant showroom. It's about 5,200 square feet. It's got MetaQuest Pros with special, OptiTrack setups to have like a local multiplayer experience. It's using ray traced VR. A lot of super smart people have come together to make this thing happen. But special VIP, who I flew all the way to Austin just to hear feedback from, did say it was the best VR experience of that type that he'd ever seen in his life, which was very validating and very exciting, and totally made the trip worth it, despite the fact that it was so short. And then I immediately flew into Boston, hung out with a couple of people in Boston, and then spent the last few days in Cape Cod with the family for the 4th of July, and surprisingly talked a lot about a lot of nerdy Unreal Engine stuff, which I wouldn't expect, especially with a 3, 5, and 7-year-old to boot.
Well, you've gotten them started young, man. I mean, they've built games, right?
Yeah. They have very silly games. The other thing I wanted to mention too is while I was at the airport, I was with my colleague June, and we started to play with the in-world AI plugin More, which I think I gave a brief shout out to in a previous podcast. We'd done this project for Vodafone with Infinite Reality. It was a pixel streaming project out in London for London Tech Week. And it was, a metahuman talking about this car, and you can ask it questions in a natural voice. And it's like a pretty natural reaction. So while at the airport with like bad audio, bad internet, we just started to mess with this. And we took our Charles Dickens metahuman, which is usually performed live by Ari Tar for our production of A Christmas Carol. And we gave it like a personality. We filled all this in the in-world website. And then we brought it into our Charles Dickens metahuman, and we just started to talk to it. We also trained it on my voice. Like I was there in the airport and I just recorded like a minute and a half of me blathering on about something. And the interesting thing is when we gave it that audio to digest, it sounded like there were like 1,000 other little people inside my throat, because it heard all the background noise and thought that was just a quality of my voice. So that was trippy. And then what we did is like, oh, well, we can just grab one of Alex's like tutorials. So we grabbed my like 90-second metahuman animator getting started video, grabbed the audio from that, and got an AI voice that spoke pretty naturally, sounded a lot like me, and knew a lot about, Christmas Carol and our particular production. And we had conversations about like VR versus stereoscopes. And the latency is much, much, much lower than something like ChatGPT, even with a crappy internet connection. So I'm like super high right now thinking about all the possibilities for like immersive theater and of course video games, and all the ways that you can start to build out these interesting characters that are, 90% of the time an AI, but also at any given moment, you could have a live performer tag teaming in as one of them. And like, maybe people don't always notice like exactly when that's happening. So suddenly when they like look right at you and they're like, Jacob, what do you think about this? And suddenly you're like very aware that you're not talking to an AI. Passing that Turing test will be really exciting.
Yeah, there was an announcement this week from one of these big AI companies called Inflection, and they have an app called the Pi, where you can now call it like you would anyone else. Like there's a little button where it's like a phone call, and you pick it up and you talk, and it's like completely conversational. I feel like you would gain some inspiration from it, but it's really, really cool and very convincing. I was pretty surprised because I haven't seen some of those demos that you've been working on, and I haven't seen enough demos of like game AI in that sense, but it seems so cool.
Yeah, love it. I also want to give a quick shout out to the Madison Square Gardens Interactive Teams Sphere project out in Las Vegas. This just opened the other night. There's still nothing going on in the interior. I think the first actual show is going to be U2, and that'll be in September. But they finally started lighting up the outside, and it's a great use of Unreal Engine with, as far as I know, and display configs. I was fortunate to be chatting with the team who was responsible for designing and building this, all the way back in 2019. And so this was before there was like all this discussion of, virtual production and the Mandalorian and all that. It hadn't quite hit that inflection point yet. So those conversations were very much about like, yeah, it'll probably be done in Unity. There's a lot of stuff that will never have been done before, but end display and a lot of the out of the box stuff you get with Unreal Engine now makes it possible to have these really cool little spinny, moons, globes, weird, pulsing.
Yeah, you got to find some, if you're listening to the podcast or you're watching it, you got to find some videos of the different scenes that they've built for this, because it is really it's a bit trippy to see displays of this quality of that scale.
Yeah.
Like it's just unlike anything. Yeah, it's huge, and I don't know. I want to see it in person. I really want to see it in person, I will say. It might not bring me all the way to Vegas, but if I was in Vegas, I would make a point just to sit and stare at it for a few minutes, right?
I think I might be speaking at Autodesk University this year. I have been debating whether or not to accept the invitation, but I think the opportunity to see this in person might actually be enough to bring me.
Yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah.
One other thing I meant to also chat about, and I'll let this video play first, is Unreal Fest Australia, which happened recently.
Yeah, that's right.
So shout out to the folks who attended that event. There were a few reports back that I heard that it was a great time. Wow, yeah, look at some of these. Sorry, we're watching this video for those of you who are listening. We're watching a video of all the different graphics, and yeah, man, it's awesome.
Yeah. Do you know, Jacob, if the videos from Unreal Fest in Australia are posted online yet?
I don't believe they are yet.
Yeah, I'll look forward to that, because it did look like there were some really great talks. It'll be neat to check that out.
For sure.
And hopefully we're going to find out soon what the schedule is going to look like for October at the stateside Unreal Fest back in New Orleans.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sad to say my talk already got rejected, but I can't be too upset because I submitted it like the same day as the deadline.
Yeah,
and I have to imagine a bunch of us made it easy enough for them to say, hey, all these kind of late submissions, we'll forget those. But yeah, I am sad to say I won't have a presentation, so I'll just have to heckle you again this year. Hopefully you don't have the 2 hour with a lunch break like you did last year.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that my Unreal Fest will be talking about this Austin project with some of the fine folks who helped make it happen, and then teaching MetaHuman Animator in the lab, so that'll be enough for me. 1 hour each. Cool. Any shout outs you want to give, anything like that, Jacob?
Shout outs. Oh yeah, I did find the person with that awesome cesium demo. Goes by AXLROZZSHDW, which I assume is Axel Roz Shadow.
Love it
if you were pronouncing it phonetically. And we will drop this link in the show notes for you to check out. But yeah, it's an awesome video of this guy flying around a cesium world, and yeah, it's awesome. You got to check it out. We'll attach that in the show notes. So that's my first shout out.
Yeah. I wanted to give a shout out to this plugin called Liquigen, Liquid and then Gen, GEN, which seems to be a really impressive real-time fluid simulation setup with a whole, like its own like blueprint node graph kind of setup. And the way it connects to Unreal is pretty cool. Looking forward to messing with that more. And yeah,
I think that's just about it for me. I'm sure I've seen lots of other stuff. One other thing. The folks over at Odyssey, who are they're a pixel streaming platform. They've done some really cool stuff with like, being able to put together your own kind of experience and world, and kind of simplifying the editor. It's a really cool experience. Go check them out. They just launched their product recently. And it's really cool. So that's another shout out for me, is the team over at Odyssey. It's all in Unreal Engine, of course. So go check that out. It's pretty cool.
Ooh, speaking of shout outs, I was very sad to see today that Furios is closing.
Yeah.
Furios was the very first platform that I ever pixel streamed an Unreal Engine experience on. It would have been like back in, geez, maybe 2017 or so. They were still in beta. They hadn't been acquired by Unity yet. And I was like, this is amazing. This is the future. I was so excited about what that was going to entail.
Yeah.
And then they were bought by Unity, and I noticed their like social media kind of went dark. I didn't know much about what was going on behind the scenes. And then today I got an email saying that in 90 days, all their services are going to shut down. So, rest in peace, Furios.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I get the feeling it was just becoming too expensive for them to operate.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I have to say, like, this is going to sound like I'm throwing shade at Unity, and I am a little bit, but like, I can't help but comment on the difference between when Epic Games acquires a company and what happens when Unity acquires a company. Like when Epic acquires companies like Cubic Motion and 3Lateral, they combine their expertise in those teams with their digital humans team, and they come out with something like MetaHuman Creator. Epic acquires companies like Megascans and Sketchfab, and now we see all the stuff that's happening with Fab, this like integrated marketplace that's built into the engine and has all this incredible 3D content. And I'd imagine that like if Epic Games had acquired Furios, for example, rather than kind of being left out to dry as what seems to have happened, they probably would have like had the Furios team talking to the TensorWorks team and like starting to build, a lot of new features into the pixel streaming capabilities of Unreal that would have benefited the whole community. And this could be totally wishful thinking, but like in general, I feel like Epic Games does a great job of integrating the companies they acquire into existing teams and producing really killer projects out of that benefit the whole community.
They totally do. And it's really impressive how well executed their acquisitions have been. I mean, no doubt about that. Like, I remember thinking about Unity when they acquired Parsec, which for those who don't know, it's like a remote workstation solution, or it used to be where you'd share your gaming PC with friends and you can kind of all play like arcade games. And then it became a remote workstation, solution or remote access solution. And they acquired that. And my initial thought was, oh, well, this is pretty cool. Like there's some interesting stuff they could do here. Maybe they're trying to build, become more solution or enterprise focused as a company. And really, I haven't heard anything new. Like we still don't even have a Linux client for Parsec. Like it supports HDR now, which is fun, doesn't work on anyone's internet. So like, I don't know. It definitely seems like there is a different level of execution that goes into Epic's acquisitions, or maybe Epic is just more focused on their goals at the moment because they kind of have a pretty clear roadmap, I think, compared to Unity. So
yeah,
worth mentioning.
Man. Two more quick shout outs before we say goodnight to everyone. One, I'll be in VR Toronto. I was going to say I'll be in Toronto. I will be at Toronto from July 16th until the 20th. VR Toronto is July 19th and 20th. It's going to be a really cool event with a lot of super smart people across the VR industries, theater and entertainment and games. A lot of folks who I've only known virtually, I'll finally get to see for the first time there. Come say hi if you're around Toronto. I'm going to try to set up some meetings with companies like, Pixamondo and cool folks like that in the area. And we'll have all sorts of demos. I'll do a keynote on the main stage. I'm going to do a nice live MetaHuman demo with Ari Tar. I'll show off some of our AI stuff. I'll be hanging out. So come say hi to that. Lastly, ready, Jacob? I have a little bit of a brag. Not tomorrow, but early Saturday morning. This is something that I just found out about like less than a week ago. I'll be leaving out of Westchester Airport at 9 a.m. and I'll be arriving in Orlando around noon. And
is this going to be something about Disney, or are you going to oh, geez.
I will be going to Galactic Star Cruiser, which is closing in a few months. So it's very hard to get tickets. It like immediately sold out once they announced that they weren't going to be keeping this around forever. A friend of mine, David Liu, was able to secure tickets. And he just basically said, hey, anyone want to come? And so I volunteered and grabbed some other folks from my company who have been suffering out in Austin, marooned there for a while. And we're all going to go and be Star Wars characters for a couple days. And it is absolutely a work trip because we're going to be studying all of the immersive theater work being done there. We're going to be brainstorming how this can be done with in-world AI characters, and how many live actors would you actually need to do like a VR version of this show. But I will be dressing in a Arcana 5 prison uniform, and I've got a cool Star Wars name, and I'm going to build my own lightsaber, and it's going to be great.
I am so jealous. This is devastating. I've wanted to go since that thing opened. I've wanted to just go to Disney for years, since I went for the first time. Essentially,
Yeah,
I became an instant fan. But when they opened the Star Wars hotel, I was like, man, I gotta go to that. And of course, it's expensive, so it wasn't like an easy choice. I was like, oh, I'll be around, I'll figure it out. And then when they announced they're closing, I was like, and then I knew like 2 or 3 people before you told me who all went and immediately bought tickets, and I was so jealous. And that's devastating. But I will want to hear about it.
Yeah, I'm sure we can take a big chunk of our next episode to just discuss what happened. And it's nice too that there isn't as much like spoiler concern now, because it's like, well, it's closing soon, so like why not just talk openly about all the cool things going on and give people a little bit of a vicarious sense of what it's like to be there.
Yeah, there's some Unreal Engine in there.
There is, yes. So see, it's totally relevant to the podcast.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you can say is Unreal Engine or not, but there is.
Yeah, I mean, and that, again, it goes back to our Apple Vision Pro discussion of like, there's so much Unreal Engine being used across Disney as a company. Like, it'd be crazy if they literally make it impossible for Unreal Engine to be inside that headset.
Yeah. That would be stupid.
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. A classic. Actually, this might be a little less than an hour 20. We might have made it a solid 1 hour podcast this week. It's incredible. But thank you everyone for listening. Make sure you like, rate, subscribe, comment, whatever it is. We love the feedback we've gotten in the past and in the comments. Keep believing it. Keep letting us know what you'd like us to talk about. If you want some deep dives, if you want something else, we're all ears, and we're trying to do this more regularly. We have a schedule now.
kind of. Immediately we set the schedule and we're like, oh, our next episode is July 4th. That doesn't work.
That didn't work. No, there was some serious oversight, but we're gonna try to do it more often, and we really appreciate everyone who's listening in. So without further ado, good night.
One way out is what I will find some excuse to chant at some point. Bye, everyone.